Happy New Year, Julie.
Happy New Year, Melissa. 2025.
We're recording this in December, but it's going to air on New Year's Day.
I know. And what a New Year's Day it is. It is a date that will forever remain precious to me in the remainder of my life.
It is a really big milestone for a brave writer. What's so special about January 1st, 2025?
Well, ironically, I started Brave Writer January 1st of 2000. And the big joke for me is that I picked a very easy date to remember because I don't do well with dates. But over the Christmas break, I had completed my very first written manual called The Writer's Jungle. And it was on New Year's Day that I decided that I was going to offer a little online class that would be similar to the email list that I used to build The Writer's Jungle. And so it was kicked off right at that point. I was taking registrations right up to January 1st. And I think we started the class on January 2nd. So that was the official beginning of what was a different name at the time, but the beginning of my company.
What was it called when it first launched?
This is so funny. I have whole notebook pages in one of my journals of me trying to think of a good name for my company. And I never liked the name that I picked, but the date was looming and I had to have a name to put on the product. And so we called it the Writing Compass. And the idea was that I would orient people to a better understanding of writing. And I even used like north, south, east, and west as a way to sort of describe what it meant to be a high quality writer and to coach writing. And I envisioned at the time that when I would develop a website, which I didn't have right away, it was 2000. Lots of people had companies without websites. Even though mine was digital, it seemed logical that I should have one. But in any case, I was picturing it being like a globe and having a lot of like countries and different like fun doors to open. I was kind of imagining like a compass rose and then this topography that I could use to describe the writing process.
You know, I think I remember that language, the writer's compass. As soon as you said it, it chimed for me way in the back of my mind. And okay, so I love this, that the day you launched this company was not the day the idea was born. Just like launching a book into the world, there's years behind the scenes. So, okay, as the wife of a comic book writer, I love a good origin story. So tell us like the Brave Writer origin story.
That's fun. I love that you put it that way because I am a graduate of UCLA with a history degree, and I did not use that degree in an official way. Like I didn't become a history teacher. I didn't go on to get a master's. I didn't go into law school. Like the typical paths that you take for history are not the ones that I took. And yet, as I got into my young adulthood, I really still loved writing. And one of the reasons I majored in history was so that I could write papers, which I know a lot of people would be like, who wants to do that? That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to write papers about literature. I wanted to write about what I would call real things, like the history of the world and the United States. And I loved it. I did well in that major because I was a confident expository writer. So what happened in my life is as I got into my adulthood, I looked for reasons and opportunities to write. Very small things many of you have done, especially pre-internet. We used to do an annual Christmas letter, right? My husband and I at the time worked overseas as missionaries. We had monthly letters that we had to write and send out. And I took that as a very big like commitment. I wanted to make them interesting. I still have some of them, and they're like telling stories, and they're more than informative. It was me trying to be a writer. And by the time we moved back to the United States, I was writing for the Wet Set Gazette for La Leche League, and I wrote for the La Leche League newsletter. They had like a little magazine, and I got one of my articles in there. And I was just looking like, where could I write? Where could I put my words into the world. I did the women's Bible study newsletter for our church for a long time. And at a certain point, my husband, who was a university professor, he worked at a school in California. They had a Doctor of Ministry program. And these students who were trying to get their Doctor of Ministries were struggling, I guess, to write their dissertations. And this one colleague of John's offered John the opportunity to make side money by helping these doctoral candidates improve their dissertations. So we were talking over dinner and John said, I have this opportunity, but my gosh, I'm so busy. I just can't possibly do it. I said, I'll do it. And he was like, what do you mean you'll do it? I said, oh, I totally know I could do that. Don't tell them that it's me. Just say, yes, you'll do it, because nobody's going to let someone with a bachelor's degree from college who's never taught improve on somebody's PhD or doctoral dissertation. But I know I can do it. And so John had blind faith in me. He's like, all right. So he took the job to help this one candidate in particular. And the candidate had failed 3 times. His dissertation failed 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he sent it to me. And I still remember laying on the bed, breastfeeding a baby, holding this huge document with my red pen. I'm just making all these margin notes. I restructured the entire thing. I rewrote whole sentences wholesale for him. We moved all these pieces around. He resubmitted it. Not only did he pass, but the committee wrote, you've engineered a remarkable turnaround on this dissertation. I've never forgotten that compliment. It was the greatest achievement of my life. And John at the time just started laughing. He was like, how did you know how to do this? You've never written a thesis or a dissertation. I'm like, it's just expository writing. I totally know how to do that. It's the same. It doesn't matter how long it is. It's all the same architecture. It's the same structure. I know how to write. So that was a realization that I had enough background to talk with some confidence about writing. And that was the first time I was ever in a position where I was giving feedback on writing. I mean, think about that. I'm in this position where I'm actually helping somebody improve their writing. I don't know. Sometimes you just have a skill, and apparently I had it. So that was I feel like I should take a breath and let you ask another question to get us where we're going.
Well, I'm just savoring that story. It reminds me of a time a writer, a children's book writer with many, 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 many books to her credit, said to me at one point, oh, you don't know how much you know. You know, you have an intuitive, instinctive knowledge. You've gained skills that you don't recognize as skills because they're so embedded. And when you tell me that story about engineering that remarkable turnaround, you had all that latent knowledge. You just didn't know what you knew.
Yeah. And I was 34. I was young. It wasn't like I hadn't worked in the field. I hadn't ever been paid to write, except for $200 here or there for an article. But that was really cool. And so we did that for a little while. I don't remember how many. It wasn't very many, but we did a couple of these dissertations. Yeah.
Were you were already homeschooling at this point?
Yes, I was. Yeah. So I was on my 5th child. I had 5 kids.
Right. 34, of course.
That's why I said I was laying in bed, nursing and writing. And part of what was fun is I was also working on my writing career at the time. I've shared this before, but John used to give me Monday nights to go to the library, and I would look up Writer's Digest, and I'd try and find places I could submit. And I was working on writing children's picture books. And I had one that I really loved, and it did quite well. It went all the way pretty far, I think, for Little Brown. But the problem is it was during a multicultural moment in the 90s, and I was writing about Morocco, and I'm not Moroccan. And they ended up publishing a book by a Moroccan that same year. So I know I just got beat out, but I felt I had one of those really positive experiences where they took it to the 2nd or 3rd round before they turned me down. And I've always sort of seen that as a little sign that I might even have the chops, even though I didn't get published right away. I joined the Institute for Children's Literature. I used to get their newsletter, and I went to one of their conferences. So in the 90s, I was working on my writing, even though I didn't have a lot of success. I didn't have a lot of publications to prove that I was a great writer, but I had encouragements. And then a funny thing happened. My ex-husband at the time got hired to run the denominational magazine for the church that we were a part of at the time, called The Vineyard. And I'm mentioning the name because some of you will know the denomination. And so John, as this literature person, he ran conferences and this magazine. And the founder of our denomination had heard, I don't know, somehow through the grapevine, that I was a writer. And I got recommended to the music department. They have Vineyard worship music was massive in the 80s and 90s. And I was recommended to the son of our founder as a potential editor for their magazine, the worship magazine. So John was doing the denominational one. I was doing the worship one.
Wow.
And that was hilarious. I'd never been an editor. What did I know about editing schedules, copy editing, putting together? And I had to put it together from scratch. I had to solicit articles, do all the editing, create the themes. You know, it was a job. It wasn't monthly, it was quarterly. So I had a little bit of time, but it was so much fun. I could totally do it while I was raising kids and homeschooling. And then that led to the denominational founder, John Wimber, asking me to be his ghostwriter. So I did that for a while. So it was like all these little votes of confidence, Melissa.
Right.
And they were in a different form than I was expecting. It wasn't like I was writing the great American novel. I was just sort of literally piecing together the tiniest of careers. You know what I mean? Like the tiniest.
And doing all this writing that is like person to person communication, like persuasive writing, expository writing, engaging, lively. Like nobody's going to read those things unless it's well written with good hooks. Like I'm just seeing all the applications in the field of what, you then went on to turn outward and be able to communicate to families. So when did your email list and those early pre-Brave Writer products or experiences enter the picture?
Yeah. So what's interesting, I think, when I look back now, is that so much of my early writing career was around shaping other people's writing. Right? I mean, that's kind of a bizarre way to have a writing career. Most people are trying to get known for their own writing. And I'm over here helping people write a doctoral dissertation, helping worship leaders write articles and books. And I edited entire collections that became books. And I did interviews and turned those into articles. And then I ghost wrote. I took somebody's sermon notes and all the times that I sat in front of them and turned them into books that had to impersonate their voice and they had to sound not like me, but like them. So I spent a lot of time in this interesting intersection with non-writers, helping non-writers sound like they were good writers. And so I learned weirdly, like this funny, unique skill set that I didn't anticipate developing. So one day, one of my friends who knew that I had this kind of work, we went to the same church, she came to me and she said, "How are you teaching your kids to write? Because I know that you do this for the Vineyard, but like, I don't know how to teach my kids. They hate writing." Well, I didn't have any kind of writing manual to use. I used all the same books my mother used that, it was like Natalie Goldberg and William Zinsser and Peter Elbow. Like these are for adults, but that informed how I understood writing. And so I taught my kids the same way. And so I looked at her curriculum and famously, I asked her if she had read the sample paragraph on the first page. And she said, yes. And I said, "Did you like it?" And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Do you wish that there were a second paragraph after the sample?" And she said, "I can't even remember what it said." And I slowly closed the notebook and I said, "Why would we want to teach your kids to write based on a model that is so unmemorable?" And that's when the beginning happened. I suddenly saw, oh, I know something about writing that's different than the way most programs teach it. So then this friend, Glenda, said, "Well, could you create a writing class during Sunday school that I could come to?" And I was like, sure. So we set up like a 10-week class, and all these parents and teachers came, some homeschool, some not, some were public school teachers. And I really thought by the second week, they'd be like, Julie, you're telling us stuff we already know. And that never happened. Every week they acted like I was talking about writing from some other planet of what writing is. And I started to gain some confidence. I was like, maybe I do have a unique point of view. So here's what really followed. At the time, my husband and I were getting ready to move to Ohio. We took a new job with a different church within our denomination in Cincinnati. And before we went, they gave us, I've never told this story before, so this is a good one. Before we left, they gave us a midlife assessment. Now, just to be clear, I was only like 37. So midlife is a stretch, but at the time I felt old. Anyway, yeah, it was great. We had to fill out all these questionnaires, and then we did this very like full day interview with a guy who does mid-career assessments. I still have my assessment, by the way. And at the end of it, he asked me like aspirations and visions and things that I could imagine doing. And at the end of it, he came back to me and he said, Julie, he takes like an hour and he reads to you his summary of what your direction should be going forward. He said, you need to run your own business where you teach homeschooling families how to write. And it needs to be online. And I was like, wow, okay, that sounds pretty cool based on everything I said. But interestingly, I was somewhat timid. I'd never run a business. So when we got to Ohio, by then I was pretty active on homeschool discussion boards. And one of the most popular companies actually invited me to write a writing manual because I was giving all this writing advice online and people really liked my advice. And that's what made me write The Writer's Jungle. I did an online group of 40 families called the Guinea Pigs. I would send them a chapter, ask them to do the activities with their kids, send me their kids' work, and for free, I would give them writing instruction. And their use of my materials showed me what did and didn't work and what needed rewriting. So that's how I wrote The Writer's Jungle. And that was in the fall of 1999.
So that's how The Writer's Jungle
came to
that's
be.
why it's full of all those stories about real kids.
Yes.
And, like examples of real kids writing.
Yes.
I love that. Oh, I love that. And like that real in the field, working with family. I mean, it just seems like the tone for Brave Writer was set even before Brave Writer existed as a company.
Yeah, I think so.
Julie.
What?
I found a post that I wrote about The Writer's Jungle. Can I just read the first
oh my gosh
lines from this post? Because it so goes to what you're just talking about. I wrote, I admit it. This is a post I wrote on my blog ages and ages ago. I admit it. When it comes to writing curricula, I'm a snob. After all, Scott and I both write for a living. We're the kind of word geeks who sit around discussing sentence structure for fun. I have never felt the need to use a writing program with my kids. That's one area I have felt I could handle on my own. But every time I go to a conference, here it is, same question you were getting, people ask what writing curriculum I recommend. In an effort to do justice to this frequent question, I have purchased several books and programs for review. None of them was anything I felt enthusiastic about passing on to other families until, drumroll, until I encountered Julie Bogart's Brave Writer.
Oh my gosh, that's unreal. Here's the thing that's amazing. So you and I were following each other's blogs. And I always was like, Melissa's the real writer because she's published books. And I'm over here, the hack. I'm like ghostwriting and editing and interviewing and coaching, but I'm not actually getting like something significant published. So when I self-published The Writer's Jungle, which originally was supposed to be published by someone else, and then they changed their mind, I was stuck, doing it myself. To have a professional author be one of the earliest positive reviews and to have it be you, I just remember being like in awe. I was like, yes, it happened. And the thing that's fun about The Writer's Jungle, and if you ever read like the early the early writings of it, I was just trying to be Anne Lamott. I just wanted to be funny. I wanted to shock the world, with my amazing prose. But what I really felt at the time was, if I'm going to write this book, it better be interesting to read, because otherwise it's all fraudulent. And I think I still feel that way. Like, if you read the copy in our classes or you read our emails, we work really hard, or our darts or our arrows. I want these to be good to read for the adults. I don't want it to just be a list of instructions and information, because part of the way we teach writing in Brave Writer is we're trying to teach you to engage the audience. So why would I tell you to do that if I don't feel the same level of responsibility to do that for you when I'm communicating? I think that's a foundational principle of Brave Writer.
And I think that it came through so clearly for me. I really responded to that. So, I went from just, I'm going to look this over in case it's something that I could recommend to people, to immediately jumping to using it with my kids.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. Like, it was so energetic and lively. The language was delicious. I just remember that. And I remembered that, your name was familiar to me because we had met on those homeschooling boards.
Yeah.
But then my daughter wound up in the hospital, and I was sort of off the internet for a year and lost touch with everybody.
Yes.
So including you, and we had only sort of known each other in that community, but the real, person to person relationship hadn't been born yet.
Right.
But I did remember, I joined. Okay, so we're going to back up, because I know I jumped a little ahead in time, because you're writing this writing manual for that company, and it winds up becoming a book that you self-published, The Writer's Jungle. There's a period of some years in there, right?
Well, it's actually not quite so long. During 1997, 8, and 9, I was very active on these discussion boards, and there were only a couple back then where everybody was. And it's where I made most of my online friendships. And some of those people even work in Brave Writer, like Jeanette Hall. She and I became very close friends in the late 90s through being a part of the same email list. And we've stayed friends all these years, and she still works for Brave Writer. So a lot of my dear friends, Tia Levings, those of you who've read her book, A Well-Trained Wife, she came from that era as well. And she was a very good writer. I always knew that she would be famous and successful for her writing someday. I understood that there was a need, and I had this sort of midlife plan that I had evolved through this moment, but I wasn't confident to pull it off for myself. So when the head of this one organization, and I knew him because the woman who started the organization had been the team leader for my mission. And so I knew them personally. So we had phone calls, and he asked me to write this book. He's like, we could sell it. You could write it. So I organized this online group of guinea pigs. I also taught the material locally in Cincinnati at our co-op. So I had both in-person experiences and online experiences. Yeah, tons of student writing to deal with. It was great. And then he pulled out. And that was sort of devastating. And I remember feeling like, wow, I was really hoping for this to be this big help in my career and in terms of money. And my husband at the time said the best thing. He said, Julie, we're going to look back and be so glad that you were free to do your own thing. And interestingly, he's right. I started right after December 31st. I offered an online class through email because the guinea pigs had been such a cool format. And it had never occurred to me to do online classes. And suddenly I was like, you know what? There's a way to teach online. And honestly, I mean, I can't 100% say this with certainty because I haven't checked every corner of the internet. But as far as I know, in the homeschool space, we were the very first online classes ever offered. And we did it through an email list, and it sold out immediately.
What's really interesting about that is that sort of established this mechanism for Brave Writer classes that was text-based rather than video-based or, verbal conversation-based. And I have always believed that is one of the great strengths of the Brave Writer program.
100%. In fact, right away, it was very clear that part of what made this kind of writing instruction so effective is it eliminated personality, facial expressions, vocal tone, what clothing the person wears, whether their hair is attractive or not. You like all of that was gone. So you just are only dealing with the writing. And the teacher as well is only being known through her writing. And so I put a very high value on the teachers in the class being enjoyable to read, being entertaining as human beings through their writing, like the delight of their text matters. And now we've been doing it for 25 years, and this model is so effective. We just keep resisting all the people who say, please go to video, because I will tell you something. I have taught everything that I've taught online. I've taught it at our homeschool co-op, and we do not get the same results. The in-person teaching does not produce the same results that we get from our students who take our online classes. And I've done both ways for decades, and they're just not even close to the same.
The kids have to write. I mean, that's the brilliant aspect of that model. The kids have to write in order to participate, and they're seeing each other's writing, and they're seeing the teacher's feedback on the writing.
Exactly.
And it's all this hugely organic, instructive experience.
You know, they talk a lot about in pedagogical circles about writer's workshop, which is this Lucy Calkin's invention where students do free writing in class and not everything is graded. And there's sort of this incremental approach to growing as a writer. But what's ironic to me is where it stopped short. First of all, eventually there are always grades. So the lack of grades is sort of an illusion. Eventually there are grades. But the other problem is each child is sort of still in their isolation tank. And the feedback from the teacher is still with this like heavy-handed authority, even if it's kind. What we've reproduced is more like what professional authors mean when they're in a writing support group as opposed to a workshop. My mother used to facilitate these in her own home. And I remember being with her. She lived in San Diego in this apartment. I'd come home from college, and there would be like a Thursday night, and it would be her with like 12 people, and they would sit in a circle and read their writing aloud and then give conversational feedback in front of each other. And, you know, that's really the model. The model is normalizing feedback. It's learning by listening to someone else's work and the feedback on that work, because that's depersonalized for you. You're never going to feel the feeling of intrusiveness when you're listening to someone else's work be talked about. And so I think for me, that model was just very deep in me, that you give feedback throughout the writing. First of all, what we call reader response feedback, not just a summary. You really show the person that you're mirroring back, you're engaging with what they want to communicate. And then you do it in a way that everyone is a witness to it, so that it normalizes this whole idea of writing being a work in progress, not being an evaluation.
Exactly. And you're able to listen to the feedback to read the feedback, right, that another student is getting, and to apply those concepts to your own work. It doesn't feel like you're being raked over the coals when you get that kind of feedback. It all does feel like you're growing, and the whole thing like gives you this space to experiment.
Right. And you know, what's interesting is, because the title of my company initially was The Writing Compass, which, by the way, I never liked. I just had it. We got invited to the first homeschool conference that I attended in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, to speak. I knew people in the higher ups, and they were like, they just believed I was good at teaching writing when I moved to Ohio, right? And didn't have any of my LA baggage where people just knew me as a normal person. They're like, oh, she must know what she's talking about. And so I remember going there. It was great, by the way. I had like multiple workshops. They all had well over 100 people attending. It was just like the heyday of these conferences. And anyway, I had to have a website, and I had to have books. So we printed everything. We put the website on the book, writingcompass.com. And wouldn't you know, I'm in the middle of speaking at my very first talk, and I'm kind of like getting impassioned. And I said, we want free writers. We want brave writers. And the second the words came out of my mouth, my brain went, oh, that's the name of your company.
Wow.
That's your company name. Writing Compass is terrible. You want brave writers.
I love that.
I know. So I went home and I told my husband, who was my tech person, I'm like, John, we have to buy a new URL and just do a reroute. And he's like, you just launched. You're going to lose so many customers. And I said, well, if we don't do it now, it's never happening.
That's right.
We got to do it like right now. So, anyone who has writingcompass.com on the cover of their Writer's Jungle, you have like an heirloom. It's like an artifact because those don't exist anymore. There were only like 40.
That's amazing. So that was all like the year 2000?
Yes. Is that wild?
Okay. It's just what it is. It is amazing. I love that. Okay, so you've got the Writer's Jungle is out in the world. You've launched this email-based writing class.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, what's really interesting is the last person to join that class, her name was Rachel, and she ended up being the best writing parent in the class, like hands down. And back then, you guys, you don't understand. There was no social media. So people were writing like essays in email all the time. It was all long form and typing. And the pages loaded really slowly. So you'd be like on your computer for hours, but it was just so lovely. I loved it so much. And she was just this very entertaining, very thoughtful writer. She had an English teacher background. And so at the end of the class, the first class was 8 weeks. It was $25.
Oh my gosh.
And I still have a picture of my first check that somebody mailed me. And I kept records on notebook paper in handwriting. Like that's how it was. But anyway, at the end of the first class, I turned to John, my husband, and I said, I think I'm going to ask Rachel if she wants to work for me. And he said, what? You've taught one class. You're already hiring people? I said, oh yeah, this is going to be big. I mean, I had a lot of faith that it was going to do well. And so I reached out to her and I said, do you want to make some extra money? I'll split everything I make with you. And she's like, yeah, that's great. And so I trained her, and within like 3 months of starting, before I even had Brave Writer as the name, she was already working for me, and we were able to offer double the classes because it wasn't just me.
That's amazing. So you went to like being a business owner with a staff right away.
I did right away.
Who are you?
I don't know. It's so funny. And Cindy, who many of you know, she's been with me from the beginning. She and her best friend Paula and I assembled my Writer's Jungle notebooks in my living room. They did it for free before this conference. They came over and we just circled the table over and over again. And so I always like to say Cindy was with me from ground zero. She didn't actually start earning money from me until like 5 years later, but she was there at the origin, just out of the goodness of her friendship heart. And so, yeah, so very interesting. And the thing is, I sort of learned business as I was flying the airplane. And the very first thing I did is I read the E-Myth, the entrepreneurial myth. And in that book, it says that if you are a technician, and most people start businesses because they are the, person who does ceramics, or the person who builds cabinets, or the person who writes, copy, you always start out with the technical skills. But if you're growing a business, you actually have to transcend the technical skills and train other people to do those skills so you can grow a business. And so I immediately was like, oh, I've got to duplicate myself. The second thing that they say in that book is when you duplicate, it has to be identical quality and product, like a hamburger, like a McDonald's hamburger. It can't be, well, hers is a good hamburger and mine is a bad one, or vice versa. And in my mind, that meant it can't be like colleges where some professors are good and some are bad. I wanted it to not matter what teacher you get. I wanted it to be that if you're taking a Brave Writer class, it would be the same quality no matter who taught. So I became a maniac about training. And that's kind of a hallmark of how we do things. Melissa will attest to that.
Yeah, I've been through that training.
You've been through many trainings. The everything, the curriculum. It took me longer actually to let go of writing the curriculum than teaching the classes. And there was a day where I realized, I have to do that now for writing. I've got to have people learn how to produce the products at the same skill level that we've taught people how to teach the classes. But yeah, so that formed me early. And a year later, it was like April 1st, and Rachel wrote to me, so will I get a 1099? And I was like, a what?
Oh.
And she's like, I mean, I've made money. I have to file taxes. And I was like, let me go to the library and find out how to do it. And so I did. And there I am with my ballpoint pen writing on carbon copy 1099.
Wow.
All my record keeping was on notebook paper. Oh my God.
Such a homeschooler learning by doing.
Oh, it was. Oh my gosh, absolutely. 100%. Have you ever heard the expression, cells that fire together, wire together? This is a neurologist's description of what happens when your kids engage in purposeful practice. To that end, Brave Writer has a brand new product called Practice Pages. You know how sometimes you just want to target one sticky, tricky issue? Maybe your kids mix up common and proper nouns, or maybe they have a hard time differentiating between the three uses of there, and there. Now we've got these short lessons that make use of French-style dictation and reverse dictation tactics to narrow the focus to those specific tricky issues and help your child expand their practice so that those cells can fire and wire together. If you'd like to learn more, go to bravewriter.com/pages or check our show notes.
So I want to talk about how this early, so you've got this manual and now you're doing these email-based classes. And here's my questions for you. When does the Brave Writer lifestyle email group come into being? And then also when does the arrow happen?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the arrow started first. It started in 2003. And here's something really interesting. My brother was really good at what do they call that? Direct mail marketing back in the 70s and 80s. And so he jumped online early like I did too. And he kind of got into internet marketing and understood it faster than I did. So he kept recommending books to me, and he would tell me the things he was learning, like how to price things. He's the one who taught me how to price the Writer's Jungle initially. And he's the one who talked to me about having an email list. And so in 2003, he made this statement, which I fully misinterpreted, but I understand it better now. He's like, you need a subscription base to stabilize your income. Like if all you're doing is selling courses and you're selling a book, you don't have monthly revenue that's predictable. He's like, but if you have a subscription, then you have predictable income. Well, ironically, at the time I was in the Charlotte Mason organization here in Dayton, Ohio, just north of me. And I somehow found myself on the steering committee. Again, they just believed me when I said I knew what I was talking about with writing. So I knew some things about Charlotte. So I got into this leadership group. And one of the things I learned from the other leaders, not from me, is they did things sort of in a monthly way. Like they would pick an artist a month and study that artist. Then they would pick like a musician or a composer a month and study that composer. Then they'd pick a poem a month. There was this like monthly feel. And I thought about that. I was like, I loved Family Fun magazine because every month a new magazine came and I could forget about all the stuff I didn't do in the old magazine.
Right.
So when my brother said this monthly subscription, I didn't think membership group, which I think is what he had in mind. I thought curriculum. And I was like, oh, well, what if people were always asking me, how do you pick passages for copy, work, and dictation? And I thought, well, maybe I should just pick the passages and teach how to analyze them and understand them. So true to form, I organized a monthly subscription to the Arrow, but it wasn't actually a product. It was an email list. And I sent the Arrow out as an email. So it'd be like, here's the book title, here's the passage, here are the things to note, here's why I picked it, here's how to teach it. And it was like $7 a month, I think, back then. It was very short. Dawn loves to tease me about how short it was. There are some times when I'd say nothing notable to remark about the punctuation.
I at a certain point after I was brought in to write Arrows, we were rebooting some of those very, very early ones that were, by then, like you had written them 20 years earlier.
Yeah.
And those were my favorites because by the time I was brought in, like there needed to be something of note.
Yes. And there always is. But I was always under this impression, especially early years of homeschooling, that parents had a lot to do.
Yeah.
And that they were also really smart and that they knew what they wanted their kids to learn. So I was just trying to give them some shortcuts. But what I discovered was that a lot of parents lack confidence in their understanding of all these ideas, especially the STEM parents. I was putting a lot of stock in the idea that most people really knew grammar or really understood things that they didn't. And so the more I got that feedback, then of course, the more these grew. And now they're much, much bigger and more thorough. And I consider them much more effective pieces of curriculum. I mean, I'm so proud of the way they've evolved and what they communicate today. I mean, they're just so far superior. I read my early ones. I'm like, these weren't even interesting. And I was supposed to be fun and interesting.
But here's the thing, Julie, I'm going to argue with that statement because I remember getting the original Redwall arrow that you wrote, and that lit my daughter on fire. I was revisiting some of the impassioned writing that she did because of conversations that we had. I mean, that arrow worked exactly the way that we still want an arrow to work.
That's true. And, I love you reminding me of that. That's so sweet. And the fun thing was I was teaching my own kids at the same time. So I had fun picking books that we loved. And then I'd ask my kids, what passages should we include? Like they kind of got a kick out of knowing that the books we loved were becoming loved by other families. And the passages I used for copy work with them were going out to other people.
Right.
So it did start that way. But at a certain point, the internet changed and PDF files became possible to purchase and download. And, my husband at the time, I give him so much credit. I don't know that Brave Writer, in fact, I'll just say it very confidently, Brave Writer would not exist had it not been for John's ambitious desire to learn the internet. Like when we built our first website, we had to do FTPing. Some of you youngsters don't even know what that is, but there was no plug and play website builder. You had to build the pages in these cumbersome programs that John had to teach himself. And then you had to use this mechanism called FTP, which is sending those pages to your website. Very difficult to edit, took huge amounts of time. I remember one time we made one mistake, lost the whole site, had to start over. Like it was just a different world back then. And John,
plus we didn't have broadband.
No.
It was slow.
No, in fact, I actually was on dial-up until January 2000. And then I said to John, I think we can justify going to cable. Maybe I'll make some money this month that will justify it. That was for sure the feeling, the feeling. And so anyway, I give him a lot of credit because he was always so curious. So at early stages, we developed a subscription-based program using PayPal before anyone was doing subscriptions. We had a way to download the PDF files. We moved our online classes to discussion board software, and then he tried to customize it for our use. It was really, I look back and I just think, well, gosh, John, thank you. And I've told him this many, many times. He just was really into it also with me, which was great.
Well, I love that the whole origin of the company is this collaborative experience, which is collaboration is so at the heart of
it is.
Brave Writer methods and philosophy.
Yeah. And he eventually even taught for Brave Writer. And, you all know I'm divorced and he and I had our challenges for sure. And so I didn't want him to teach for me because I didn't want to ever supervise him because I didn't want to have fights. Right. And he just kept asking, come on, Julie, let me, I want to teach Pride and Prejudice. And finally I was like, all right, I'm going to train you. And if I see you even go one wiggle inch out of line, you're axed. I don't care. And he became this beloved teacher. When he would teach Pride and Prejudice, his entire writing voice was like Jane Austen style. So he was constantly addressing people as master and mistress. And he was using the old English. Yeah. And he was so good at it. And they would just get such a huge kick out of it. So yeah, we really did work together to build it. It was definitely his books too. The books I'm looking right now at the Ellen and Bacon Guide to Writing, and I went through the St. Martin's Guide and all of these college level composition books that he used for teaching. Those really helped shape my understanding of writing instruction, because obviously I was a hack. I was making it up as I went. And I wanted to be good. I actually believed in having a pedagogy, not just a hunch, So I felt like I was on a massive learning curve for the first, I don't know. Well, I don't think it's gone away. Let's just be honest.
No, I was just about to say, I think that's a really important piece of the Julie Bogart magic, which is that you're a chronic learner, Julie.
Yes. And so is the whole company. That's their whole characteristic. It's not just me.
Yeah. Oh, right. I know that I wouldn't have been a good fit if I weren't also engaged in that way, wanting to constantly stretch my skills, improve, know more, learn more. And we're homeschooling moms because of that. But I think something that sets you apart is you are always interested in the thought level behind and beneath.
Yes.
Not just what we're doing, but why we're doing and why it works. And you're always curious about it. You're always interrogating what exists and asking what's the next, or is there a better way? You're iterating. You're such an iterative thinker.
Thank you. Wow. That feels amazing to hear you say that. I feel like it's accurate. But it's one of those things that you learn about yourself as you go. It's not something I set out to be. It's just something that I discovered. And I would say that the internet really accelerated it. I put myself in the company of so many different kinds of people deliberately, and different kinds of writers and thinkers starting in the 90s. And that accelerated my own hunger to actually be good at the things that I invested in. You asked about the Brave Writer lifestyle. And of course, that came right directly out of Charlotte Mason world. This whole idea that you need a rich linguistic inner life in order to be an effective writer. We can't write without this massive toolkit of vocabulary. And we spend so much time focusing on how to punctuate and spell that vocabulary instead of growing the resource of language. And so art and music and nature and poetry and literature and television and going to plays, all of this was the rich soil that I knew helped grow writers. So the Brave Writer lifestyle for me was, I was trying to get away from this idea of curriculum, because there was a lot of back then, a lot of workbooks and textbooks that were commonly used. And I was trying to say, but first you got to grow this soil beneath your feet. It's more of a lifestyle. It's something that you do as a way of living more than something you attack, study, and test for. So for a lot of people were like, lifestyle, that's like lifestyles of the rich and famous. And they thought the word was kind of a silly word, but I liked that it wasn't education language. I wanted it to kind of permeate the way we live. There might be other words, now we have lifestyle bloggers and all that kind of stuff, or influencers. But for me, it was, what does my daily life include that contributes to writing?
So I joined that list and I loved it because, so I was also totally steeped in it was Charlotte Mason and John Holt who made me want to homeschool my kids, right? And
definitely.
I think by the time your Brave Writer lifestyle list came along, I was full throttle with my kids, and that was our lifestyle. And I loved it for two reasons. One is, just because I know how to do things doesn't mean I can't benefit from prompts and reminders.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean, right? There would be no need for a cookbook market if we all, we know how to make some dishes and we walk into the kitchen and we cook out of our own heads all the time. Sometimes it's nice to have a recipe to fall back on. So I knew that there were times when I really benefited from opening that email and being like, oh, right. It's Wednesday. Here's what we could do today. We could watch a movie together and talk about it. I loved that for me. And then I also loved, it was a way that I could share these ideas that had so enriched me from Charlotte Mason's work with friends, I could forward an email and say, I think you would really love this. And bit by bit, and now you've got people who are coming from a much more curriculum, checklist, grades, and tests model of education. Whereas
Right.
I was like, I became a homeschooler because I wanted to do it, this way, this lifestyle way. But you've got a friend who's feeling really oppressed or stressed by the program that she's using or the battles she's having with her kids, and it seems like a slog. And you could
Yes.
forward this email and say, guess what? You get to have fun with your kid today. That's your job.
Well, what was really funny about that email is it came from the Fly Lady. And some of you will remember her. She's this woman who used email to teach us how to keep house. And I lived by it for a while. I was like, my little computer would ding and I'd look at the email and it would say 5-minute drawer cleanup. And I would stop what I was doing to clean out a drawer. And then
those habits are so embedded in me.
Oh my gosh, totally.
It's like, it's Monday. It's time to bless my house.
Yes, exactly. Or they, shine your sink, shine your sink, shine your sink before you go to bed. And I started realizing how much I loved waking up to a clean sink. Like, those were really wonderful habits to cultivate. So I tried to do the same thing for Brave Writer. I'm like, okay, it's Monday. This is where you start a writing project. It's Tuesday, do a little copy work. It's Wednesday, do some dictation. I kind of parsed it out. And, Wednesday afternoon is a movie and Tuesday is poetry tea time and Thursday, right? And we had Friday art.
Right.
And I think what I was trying to do is seed the habit. Everybody's going to organize those things differently in the end in their families. But sometimes we have to be reminded repeatedly in order to see the value enough to adopt it, to give yourself enough times to fail so that you will then eventually do it. You're like, okay, they brought up copy work 5 months in a row. I should at least try it now.
I always say that as a Charlotte Mason devotee, I was into habits before habits were cool.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that.
And I just think that email list was another example of this beautiful melding that you accomplished between philosophy and technology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Because it's not just about, I read the books too, right? But you found a way to deliver to masses of families. So I was very influential in a small circle of friends. And here you are reaching dozens and dozens and then hundreds and eventually thousands of families and helping them transform not just their habits, but their thinking about learning and writing and their relationships with each other.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing.
I'm happy to have had a front row seat to this whole thing and being the chronicler that I am and the squirrel it away for storytelling. I remember so many of these moments so clearly. It was really fun to think through what we were going to get to talk about today. I want you to talk about...
Wait, hold on 1 second. Let me just say this. Melissa, there's so much to say. Can we do a part 2?
I was just thinking oh my gosh, we've been on an hour.
But there is more to say, interestingly. And let's end this episode with this thought. I'm at the 25-year mark. And for those who don't know, I got divorced the year that I was married 25 years. John and I kind of joke about it now, but it's like we limped over a finish line of 25 years. And as this date was coming, one of the things that I realized is that I knew I didn't want to be done. I didn't want to be retired before I got to actually celebrate a 25th anniversary with a lot of triumph and joy rather than limping over this finish line. And so it's fun for me to be able to look back and affirm that journey. And what I'm hoping that the listener is taking away is that those early days when you're just starting to figure out who you are and what you're good at, you have no idea where they'll take you, but they can really take you somewhere. And I just all along was kind of responding to the moment. I did not cultivate a speaking career when my kids were small, for instance. I stayed home. I didn't grow my audience very large. We weren't making a ton of money, especially in the first few years. In fact, I remember for several months in a row, we made $300 a month, and it made all the difference. I was like, wow, if we just make $300 a month for the rest of our lives, we'll be fine. So, there's that old scripture that says, don't despise the days of small beginnings. I think what I'd like to do is do a part 2, even if it's just to indulge me, because I am finding it valuable to go back and to actually notice the journey. And I'd like to do that with all of you. And hopefully it will not only give you some fun insight into what Brave Writer is all about, but it could support other people who are in a different stage in their own development as awesome adults.
I love that, because this is really, it's not just the oral history of one company. It's the development of thought and of experience and coming into your own in a way that allows a lot of other families to come into their own.
Yay.
I'm happy that I am happy that we're chronicling all of this.
Me too. This is great. All right. Well, let's do that. Thank you, Melissa, for hosting and interviewing. And let's do a part 2. I would love
Awesome.
To.
All right. To be continued.
You've been listening to the Brave Writer podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.